Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. This week we have another very, very special broadcast. The focus for this week will be on lessons from the case of ADNAN SYED. It's a very troubling case out of Baltimore, Maryland, not far from where I live. On the 19th of September, 2022, the conviction of ADNAN SYED was vacated after 23 years of wrongful imprisonment. He was accused of murdering Hae Min Lee, who was a fellow student and his quote-unquote ex-girlfriend. And he was accused of this crime at the age of 17. He was tried and convicted as an adult. The determined work of a few supporters, and of special note here is Rabia Chowdhury, an eye-opening 2014 investigative podcast known as Serial, and a prosecutor's office that was willing to revisit the case in the interest of justice, is what led to the brothers' release a few days ago. Now, the question for us today is, what are the important lessons? What are the important lessons that can be extracted from this very, very troubling case? Now, before exploring this question, let's take a look at a touching piece of video. Please play the video.
I do not. No, I don't have to go back, mashallah. I don't have to go back to court, inshallah. Today? No, inshallah, not today. Never. Never.
Yeah, he said.
I wanted that video to be shown because there was a glimpse of a mother who was just overcome with tears of joy. And when I first saw the video, I thought about how, just how many times that image and that emotion that we saw in that video, how many times could it be multiplied throughout the United States of America, a land that likes to project itself around the world as the land of liberty and justice for all, quote unquote. How many times could it be played, not through a prism of joys of tear, but joys of grief? My return guest for today's conversation is a retired attorney, Mohammed Bashir. I couldn't think of a better brother to have join me for some analytical insight and breakdown of some of the particulars surrounding this case. Before we bring him on, let me just say, this case features a very interesting past characters. There's Rabia Chowdhury, who is within the parts of the Muslim community, rather controversial figure because of some of the connections she has. She is herself a practicing civil attorney, but she has connections with organizations and government, a government initiative that has caused a great amount of concern within large pockets of the Muslim community, and this has made her somewhat of a controversial figure. But with that being said, she played a very important and pivotal role in keeping this case alive. And it was because she has a personal connection with the Syed family. They know each other. Her family and their family know each other well. She knew this young brother, growing up. And I believe, if I remember correctly, in one of her narratives, she said he was best friends with one of her brothers. So it was because of this personal connection that she stayed with this case, and she, she beat the bush and was able to bring a few other people on board that were key in reopening the case for deeper and a deeper and more thorough investigation. The most important of the persons being, the journalist behind the podcast serial. So we have, Rabia Chowdhury, we have Young Lee, the brother of May Min Lee, or Haymin Lee. For me, this brother stands out because, this case, you can never, subhanAllah, you can never have closure when someone you love is murdered. I don't believe you can ever have closure. But in cases like this, where, it's a case that because of police and prosecutorial misconduct, it needs to be reopened for re-examination. And so many of these cases, the vast majority of these cases are not. But in this instance, this case was reopened. And in reopening the case for a deeper investigation, you also reopened wounds from the family. And, I was really impressed by the brother of Haymin Lee. From what I understand, through a tremendous amount of emotion, as he spoke to the judge via Zoom on the day of Adnan's release. He spoke about how difficult it was, to have to deal with this case, over 20 years later, what happened to his sister. But he then said, he is in favor of justice, and he believes in the justice system in this country. And he encouraged the judge to do the right thing. If the facts are that this man who has spent 23 years imprisoned is not the one who murdered my sister, then yes, he should be released. Yes, do the right thing. I applaud him for that. We have, the defense attorney, Erica Suter, who is a very important part of this cast. We have, of course, the Baltimore State's attorney, Marilyn Mosley, who signed off on the case being reopened. We have the prosecutor, and this prosecutor is very special in my book, Becky Feldman. She was the one who spearheaded the motion to vacate based upon what she found in her investigation. Now, my understanding also is that this prosecutor used to be a public defender. In fact, she was, from what I understand, pretty high up in the public defender's office. And so she comes at being a prosecutor from also, having had that background and, clearly being a person who is not just about wanting to convict and to protect bad convictions that have taken place, but this appears to be a prosecutor who was truly about justice. And this is the type of prosecutor that, in my humble opinion, it reflects, the power of a prosecutor's office. What a prosecutor who is inclined toward justice can do in order to bring justice about, and especially in troubling cases like this. So, my hat off to Prosecutor Becky Feldman. Then we have also the Detective Bill Ritz. Clearly, according to what has been revealed about him, not just in this case, but also in others, a bad cop who should be held accountable for his misdeeds in office. Then we have Jay Wilds, a former friend of Adnan, who, from my humble perspective, clearly has some dirty hands in this 23-year-old case. And then we can't say enough for Sarah Koenig, the journalist behind the serial podcast investigation. Really an extraordinary podcast. I can't believe that I didn't see it. I had heard about the serial podcast, but I never took the time to look at it until this went down. And really, it is a thought-provoking podcast. Without any further ado, let us bring my brother on. Like I said, I couldn't think of a better man to have join me for this conversation than Brother Muhammad Bashir. Welcome back to the platform, my brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. First of all, let me apologize to you and your audience. You see this little badge right here, this badge of honor. It just demonstrates that I was just released from the hospital. So if I sound a little bit, worn out, it's because of the hospital where will wear you out. So
yes, it will. Yes, it will, brother. Yes, it will. So I'm glad you're on this side of those walls.
Mashallah.
Well, brother, you start out wherever you want to start out, man, with your perspective on this question of lessons.
One person that you didn't include, actually two people that you didn't include in your list of people who were part and parcel of this intimately, both good and bad, is the defendant, Adnan Syed. Adnan went in at 17 years old.
Right.
He's coming out having spent more time in prison than he did on the street. Mm-hmm. This is a story that we know in the so-called African-American community all too well. We know it with Geronimo Pratt. We know it with Dhoruba bin Wahad. We know it with the Black Panther Party. We know it with case after case after case. We know it with the Scottsboro Boys, et cetera, et cetera. We can go down the list. And so therefore, the patience that it takes, while other people are fighting for you to keep your hope, to keep your spirit up, to keep and to stay positive. So between him, his mom, who was a towering figure in the documentary, towering figure. So Kudos to them. I wish them all the best. May Allah continue to preserve them. And inshallah, by the time we close here, Sheikh, I want to get into something that it really scares me about the Muslim community, especially as it relates to being incarcerated. We have a tendency to read Surah Yusuf, and we read it because Yusuf was in jail and he did all the stuff that happened to him. And it's a story of patience and of perseverance and trusting in Allah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a tremendously great story to tell until we get to a situation like this, where it actually happens. It actually punches us right in the mouth, because it doesn't normally happen in every other community the way it happens in the communities that policing and police officers and criminal justice were designed to control, and that's the Black community. So that's the first lesson. The nature of the system. This is not new. This is a system that was designed to control the Black community. He just happened to get to be one of those brown people who had the experience of what it's like to be Black in America. They treated him, they called him, check this out, as a way of making him look bad. They called him a Muslim in court, so that you get a clear understanding. To say that someone is a Muslim in court, from the prosecutor's standpoint, is improper conduct, improper prosecutorial conduct, so that you know. Why? Because when you reflect on someone's religion, the potential is anybody who has a misunderstanding with that religion or a lack of understanding of that religion may hold that against them. So it's not like you say, oh, he's a Muslim, and everybody say, oh, it must be a great guy, he's a Muslim. No, the idea is stuck into the stereotypes and the stereotypes that they create, and the prosecutors know that when they say it. They said he was from Pakistan. He wasn't from Pakistan. He was born in Baltimore. But his people are from Pakistan. And so therefore, any stereotype that you can connect to Pakistan is exactly what they were intending to do. Again, because what the underpinnings of the arguments being made against him at 17 years old is that this was an honor killing. You know, we all heard the stories. We hear the stories about Indo-Paki community. The girl disrespects their parents, and the parents send the brothers out to kill the sister. That's a mythology. I don't know how accurate it is. I've never been to India. I've never been to Pakistan. But it's a mythology that's locked into the American psyche as to how Indo-Paki men treat their women. And so therefore, why wouldn't he be amongst those who would retaliate against his girl when she kicks him to the curb? Playing on the psyche, which is racism, white supremacy 101. But again, this is something that if you were Black in America, you experience this each and every day. The labeling of you through things that are stereotypical or things that are just not true, because the other communities that will judge you have no idea whether or not they're true. So that's a lesson to be learned.
Interesting, brother. You know, and I particularly found it interesting, the political prisoners that you referenced, as examples of, the other side of, American justice, that the side that we know only too well. But these were all political prisoners. Now, it grabbed my attention because there has been a little debate within some corners of our own Muslim community, again, because of Adnan Syed's association with this sister, who is a controversial figure within certain quarters. There's a view that he was not a political prisoner, and he should not be compared with Muslim political prisoners. Now, with that being said, I beg to differ with those who hold that view. From my perspective, there are two types of political prisoners. There are the political prisoners of conscience. There are, the political prisoners who are imprisoned because of, their actions based upon their philosophical, ideological beliefs, their determination to be forces of resistance against what they consider to be a corrupt and oppressive status quo. These are prisoners of conscience, political prisoners. These are the the traditional,
Mhm.
political prisoner.
Right.
Then there is the political prisoner who, in my humble opinion, from the work that I've done, is the victim of the politics of bigotry, the politics of racism,
Mhm.
the politics of classism, the politics of capitalism, and all of what I saw Said, and I see him. I see Adnan Syed as one of those many prisoners, the political prisoners of that other stripe.
Mhm.
And so when you made the opening references that you made, I mean that it struck a chord with me.
Mhm.
And I wonder if that was, if you did that intentionally, or if it just happened to come out that way.
No. You know me well enough to know that every shed I ain't sleep with me. I make sure I do certain things for certain particular reasons. Why? Because most communities will not recognize you if you're Black, unless you mention Malcolm X. So the idea that you can mention Malcolm X so that you have an intimate connection with Malcolm X gives you credibility in other communities, even especially when these other communities come to America, immigrant communities come to America, believing in the American criminal justice system, believing in justice, believing in the system, believing that it works. But they won't ask the people who it is, who have the foot on their neck, what the system is like. We could tell you what the system is like, what it really does, what its real intentions were, because we've been here 400 years trying to change it. And so that you get a clear understanding, and so that everyone gets a clear understanding. The people who are overturning this particular case, are you ready? Marilyn Mosby is the state's attorney.
Right.
When Marilyn Mosby was elected in 2016, Marilyn Mosby instituted a program to review sentences, to review cases that had controversy. And part of that sentencing and part of that review, Mr. Said's case became part of that review. It's being done in New York. It was being done in San Francisco before they had a referendum to oust a progressive prosecutor. It was being done in New York. It's being done every place that you can find a progressive prosecutor who happens to be Black, because the Black prosecutors who are coming in are beginning to understand the necessity for reform within the criminal justice system. It's been something that has been ballied about for the last 100 years, something that was fought for in the civil rights movement, something that was fought for in the Black Power movement, something that was fought for by the Panthers and SNCC, et cetera, et cetera. And you're seeing now the educated fruit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that educated fruit, Said is a beneficiary. But nobody asked Marilyn Mosby when she was running about whether or not this particular reform would impact on Said or Mr. Said.
Mm-hmm.
And therein lies the underlying problem, especially in the Muslim community. When we come together, we have to come together and be able to share experiences. I created you in nations and tribes so that you would know one another.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know me if you're not willing to listen to my experience? I have better experience with America and criminal justice than most criminal trial attorneys. So when attorneys sit down with me, they want to know, from your perspective, Mr. Bashir, tell me about criminal justice, especially here in America, 30 years in.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't you ask me? And so therefore, anything that comes out new in the system, if you don't attribute it back to those people who fought, etc., and put you in a position to win, then all you're doing is you're playing into the stereotype of the criminal justice system, and that is that it works. That it works.
Yeah.
And so you walk away from this case with the wrong lesson. You can walk away from the case saying, if in fact he's not retried, that it worked, ED, but you cannot walk away from the system saying that it works. Not the way you perceive it, because it worked the way it was supposed to proceed by virtue of the officers telling Jay what to say. They gave him that story. You could tell that they gave him that story. I mean, it was so obvious, it was ridiculous. They said, when you pulled up over at Leak Park, did you notice some like white barriers? What is that suggesting to him? He can say, I pulled over by some white barriers. The next time he gives a statement, he says, I pulled over by some white barriers. Isn't that exactly what happened with the Central Park Five? Yeah. They suggested a story to him and got these young kids to admit, confess, whatever it was. And all the kids were just doing regurgitating the story that was given to them by the police. This is a well-known tale in the Black community. But who's asking? Until a case presents itself like something like this. Another lesson to be learned. There are people here who have been through this before. You can ask. You can ask why Indo-Paki kids aren't told about their contact with police officers, but Black kids always have to have the talk. Their parents always have to have the talk. Why do you have to have that talk? You would know at that point that at 17 years old, when they bring you in for questioning, you remember the scene where the lawyer comes up to the gate and he said, I represent Adnan Syed. And as of this moment, I want all questioning to stop. And the voice on the back says, did he hire you? No, his parents did. Well, until he tells us that he wants you as your lawyer, you have no say so here. But he doesn't. The lawyer says that he doesn't even know that I exist. The cop basically said, "Well, that's your problem." We've seen that a million times.
Yeah,
we could have told that white lawyer, "This is what's going to happen when you walk up in there." But who's listening?
Yeah, it brings to mind, Aki, it brings to mind that the point that you're making here, that poem, Justice by Langston Hughes, that justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we Blacks so wise.
That's
but
right.
hides two festering sores, which once perhaps were eyes.
There you go.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I mean, there are so many lessons from this, but I've listened to the pundits, I listened to everything, and they keep giving you these America the Free, Home of the Brave lessons. Yeah. And there are some very good lessons on how it is that you address police officers, how it is that your community should show up and show out. All right. You remember there was an issue as to whether or not the Indo-Paki community should show up to the trial, right? Because of the nature of Islamophobia.
And they did not.
The dad was afraid.
In large numbers. They did not.
That's right. The dad was afraid because of the long beard, et cetera, that jurors might perceive him as a terrorist. This is what was going around in America at the time, right? Right? That was a thought process. Yeah. Where would you get that thought process from? That you would not show up for your family. On the other side of that is what? Nobody showed up for him. This is the other side that they think. When you show up, beard and everything, think about it. I'll show you the argument so that you can remember it. When they tried to get a bail for him, they talked about how the community had come together and like 9 people were willing to put up their houses. That's a beautiful thing. That's an extraordinary thing, saying the community is behind this young man. And they're arguing to a Black judge. And the prosecutor steps up and says, you see, look at the kind of resources that he has to be able to be a flight risk. These people are willing to put up their houses. This is the argument. Tell me if it makes sense. They're willing to put up their houses so that if he leaves the country, they lose everything. They've worked all their lives to get to America. They're probably two generations in, but they're going to put up their house so that this kid could run to Pakistan. This lady said he could run to the embassy and get a passport tomorrow. Now, so whether he does good with an excellent argument, I have backing, or he has no backing, he's still in the same position. Every Black man who has ever been charged with a criminal offense knows that. If I step forward and say, yeah, I got a job, I got this, that, and the third, boom, that's held against you. It's not held against you in other communities, but it's held against you in the Black community. And if you say you have no job, the judge says, well, how can I ensure that he's going to appear? He has no backing, he has no support, he has no job. I'm setting bail at such and such and such. It's held against them either way. And that's exactly what the dad with the beard. Dad, if you're going to be judged either way wrongly by this community, then put your best foot forward and go to court and represent your son. There should have been 1,000 people there representing him. every day in court. Why? Because again, there is safety in numbers for him. You never know what a jury, having tried thousands of jury trials, you never know what a jury is perceiving in a courtroom. My name is Muhammad ibn Yahya Bashir. I have to introduce myself every time in front of a jury. In Pawtucket, Arkansas, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in Louisville, Kentucky, in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Washington, D.C., in New Jersey, oh my God, in New York. I got to introduce myself as Muhammad ibn Yahya Bashir. You think that they're not looking at me and saying, who does he think he is? But I have to be that. And so the first thing that you do in those kind of situations is you put your best you forward. And if you happen to be Indo-Paki with a long beard, then you come in there as the sharpest, most contrite, most humble Indo-Paki with the long beard that you can possibly have. You let the people see you for who you really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of the other lessons, as I have been reflecting on this case and where it is right now, are the following. The danger, and this is really a message that young Muslims, both here and abroad, in America, in South Africa, in the UK, in other Western so-called democracies, living and anywhere else in the global community, the global South, the predominant Muslim populated world, the danger of living a double life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one foot in the deen, one foot in the dunya.
Right.
And thinking that this, double consciousness is all right. So that there's that is one of the lessons to come out of this. Another lesson is, this happened in 1999. This is another very important lesson. This happened in 1999. This was before 9/11. Mm-hmm. There are those who would like the Muslim community and people who have the capacity to be, sympathetic toward what Muslims have been going through post 9/11. There are folks who are behind the madness who would like us to believe that everything changed after 9/11 because of 9/11. SubhanAllah, that is not the case, and you and I both know that. It's not the case at all. This is just another example of the fact that everything didn't change after 9/11. The only thing that 9/11 did was it increased the targeting that was already underway in our community, and that targeting, it got deeper and more out in the open,
right?
And legally legitimized. Mm-hmm. This is what 9/11 did, and then the other lessons as I see them, the folly, and you just touched upon this, the folly of putting your faith in the system. Mm-hmm. And in defense attorneys. I mean, there was a lot of money that was raised by the defense attorney that went to trial with this brother. The second trial, the first trial ended up being a mistrial.
Right. And
that second trial, and that attorney that went, that defended this brother, a seasoned attorney, with a lot of years under her belt. She got a lot of money from the community, and she did a very poor job of defending this young man, a very poor job of defending him. And but there is this mindset, and I've had to deal with it so many times over the years. I've had to deal with this in my human rights work, this mindset that, just get a good attorney, and struggle. If we have to struggle to pay that attorney, that a good attorney is what is going to save the day. A good attorney is going to be what we need in order to get our loved ones back with us, and that is simply not the case. Right. I've been arguing for the longest time that communal agitation, communal solidarity, a communal show of support, strong support, is what is needed. SubhanAllah, my mind has been going back in time in that Baltimore area as a result of what has transpired over the past few days, Brother Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I thought about was, I remember the brother and his family, they belong to the largest center in the Baltimore area, Islamic Society of Baltimore, ISB, also known as Masjid al-Rahma. They belong to that large community. And I've had a relationship with ISB for years, for years. And at one time, years ago, before my involvement in the case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, this was probably one of the most supportive centers for me and our organization's work in the greater, DMV. In the DMV, it was probably the most supportive years ago, under a different, administration years ago. I remember when this went down, and I remember, the father speaking to me at one point. I wasn't aware then that there had already been, that there would, I had forgotten that there were two trials. I had just forgotten that there were two trials, and that the first one ended in a it was a mistrial. It was a mistrial. Right. And then the second trial, of course, they tweaked their, and they were able to come away within record time with a finding of guilt on all counts, subhanAllah.
Right.
But, I remember the father coming to me one day. I remember him coming to me. I can remember it like it happened yesterday. And he came to me, and he asked if there was anything that we could do, and to advise or to help in that situation. And my response to him, and also to one of the brothers who at the time was in a leadership position, and this was a brother who, alhamdulillah, he and I had a very good relationship. He kept the door open for me at ISB. So whenever I wanted to come through and speak to the community, it was never a problem. I remember speaking to him after the father spoke to me, and my advice to them at that time was, there needs to be a strong communal show of support for him. But on the other side of that, and the other side that carried the day within the community, was no, quiet, just raise money to give to the attorney, that we're going to win it that way. SubhanAllah, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Right. So I remember not a few years later, Obama's in office. Well, good number of years later, Obama's in office. Obama visits ISB, and there is this huge, as you would expect, turnout, man. I mean, there had to be a lot of people turned away. We don't have enough space, and there was a lot of love for Obama and what have you. And I remember thinking then, not so much about Brother Syed. He was out of sight, out of mind. I was thinking more about all of the other cases I was involved in at the time. I was thinking about CVE and how that was able to be, moved even more, how it was able to become deeply entrenched within parts of the Muslim community nationally, and what that, CVE, CVEs, counter violence. Oh, I forgot what the acronym stands for. But, this was the government's so-called interruption for young Muslims program that was supposed to, help, bring them back to a point of moderation. Well, it ended up being just a program where young Muslims were being targeted. And I remember at this point, I remember thinking to myself, man, if we could get Muslims to turn out in large numbers, at courthouses when these brothers and a few sisters are in the dock, turn out in these kind of numbers and demonstrate their concern through a variety of other means, peaceful and legal, to demonstrate their support for those in the dock and their willingness to come to bat and to struggle and to hold America accountable for the terrible things it's doing in the name of national security and a so-called war on terrorism. I mean, we would be so much better protected as a community. Right. But subhanAllah, I mean, we didn't have it. We still don't have it, and this is what is hurting us. So the other thought that came to mind for me was police and prosecutors who engage in willful misconduct, and they need to be held criminally accountable for this, man.
Yeah.
As long as they are able to continue doing these types of things and not be held accountable,
right,
it's going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to happen. They need, subhanAllah, to be held accountable and in a very stiff way. I'm talking about years of imprisonment. This young brother spent 23 years. The police and the prosecutors that conspired to convict him without the evidence to prove that he was responsible, they need to spend years of imprisonment in my home.
And not only did they conspire, the reason why it's being overturned, or at least being revisited, or why he was released, is because they had evidence that was potentially Brady material. For your audience, Brady means that Brady is Brady versus Maryland, a case that suggested that whenever the government has information that points to your potential innocence or is potentially exculpatory, that you could potentially use to establish your defense, and they do not turn that over to you, they have an obligation to turn it over to you in discovery, because their goal, that is, as a prosecutor, you are a member of the state and you have a mandate to pursue justice, not convictions. And so therefore, when you don't turn that over, that means you're pursuing what? Convictions over justice. And so therefore, the courts have ruled that if you don't turn over Brady material that is potentially exculpatory material, that's a violation of that particular person's rights. It's a right to due process under the Fifth Amendment. It's a right to due process under the 14th Amendment. It's also a violation of your right under the Sixth Amendment, a right to effective assistance to counsel. Because again, if I know that there's another suspect that you're investigating, that potentially is something that I could use as a defense. The fact that you would withhold that information from me is a violation, and that's what's leading to this overturning of this particular verdict. Now, so that everybody knows, this is not new.
That's right.
This has been the way it has been. You don't come to a case like Brady versus Maryland that winds up in the Supreme Court, except that it has been an ongoing practice to withhold evidence that is potentially exculpatory. So we know that, but who's asking? So and then when you're talking about the lawyers and the cops in Baltimore City, since Marilyn Mosby has been there have been almost 4,000 officers who have either been placed on a lack of credibility list, which means they can't come to court and testify because of prior bad acts, meaning they've planted evidence on someone, they've lied under oath, etc., etc. Her team has determined that these people have no credibility. Just recently, they had to reverse 383 cases of people that either gone to prison. This is just 2 weeks ago.
How many cases?
383 cases.
Wow.
That people who have literally gone to prison, done their time, etc., they had to reverse these cases because these officers who are incredible. And remember, this is Baltimore with a history of this. This is not new.
Yeah.
So our ADNAN SYED case helps demonstrate the same thing. All you got to do, those of you who want to watch the video and then go on and put on the video done on the Central Park 5. Look at the similarities. This is New York versus Baltimore.
Yeah.
All right. You can watch the similarities and watch them play out. They're almost identical. Them young boys did 7 years in prison on a crime that everybody knew they couldn't have committed, except that, and even though they had DNA that none of the DNA matched, that sound familiar in this case? None of the DNA that was tested matched Adnan. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't attempt to match it with anyone else. What you bet that the reason why their prosecutors offered them a new trial, which is, by the way, they didn't offer outright dismissal until they secure the DNA on someone else, which is smart. So they offer him a new trial, and the judge says you have 30 days. But what you bet that DNA, since they already attempted the DNA on him and it didn't, the DNA under her nails, the young lady's nails, Miss A, don't ever forget her name. Miss Hay, don't ever forget her name.
That's right.
What you bet that the DNA matches someone that was within the realm of their circle of people to investigate. But the police decided who it was they were going to have as their suspect. And what you bet, it was based on the same stereotypes that the prosecutor, argued from the jury. He's a Muslim, he's a Pakistani, it's an honor killing, etc., etc. What you bet? I'll bet my shirt on it that somewhere that DNA is going to match someone who has nothing to do with that, and it was just a matter of rage, or I want the sex, you're not willing to give it to me, so I'm going to take it. And then when they realized they choked her to death, it was too late for the sex. Now, I'm telling you from 30 years of criminal trial experience that this is the mentality. This is how the heat of passion works. All right? And so I'm not implicating anyone. I'm just telling you that I've been in this scenario before. I've seen this before. All right? But again, these are the lessons that you can draw from this. All right? You can draw from police officers having a single-minded approach to the law. A single-minded approach that once they lock in on a suspect, they will do almost anything to manipulate the facts, the evidence, the witnesses to get that particular person. Of the 383, I'll give you an example. Of the 383 people cases were now dismissed, do you know they're still on the record as crimes in the city of Baltimore? So when people talk about Baltimore being a city that's ravaged with crime, well, wait a minute. We got at least 4,000 cases since Marilyn Mosby has been there that have been dismissed. At least 4,000. Do you take those off? Does that make Baltimore less criminal? Huh? Think about that. No, they stay on the statistics. When Judge Shineland in far back as 2008 ruled that stop and frisk in New York was illegal because it criminalizes a community. You think they took all those arrests off? Because they don't count statistics on crime by virtue of convictions. They count statistics on crime by virtue of arrests. So the more black people they arrest for selling loose cigarettes, anybody that sound familiar to anybody? Giving a false $20 bill to someone, anybody that sound like, the more the crime statistics go up in that community, because that community now is painted as the crime capital of the world. You know, and so therefore you say, oh, look at the rate of crime in the black community. 10 years from now, all the cases that are going to be dismissed, like the over 4,000 out of Boston, where they found the young lady who was the medical examiner or the lab tester for drugs, was fudging the results, so they had to dismiss all these cases against all these black people who were convicted of that. Keep me out. Let me go on. Miami-Dade, Florida, where the police chief said we need to solve some of these burglaries, so they went out and arrested any black person they could find. 50 convictions that all had to be overturned when they realized just targeting black people. Tulia, Texas, where a police officer just targeted an entire community. 150 convictions. Go to Tulia, Texas right now and Google what the crime rate is in Tulia. They never take those things off the record, and therefore the perception of one community is different because of the issue of crime that's being placed here. And so therefore I don't begrudge the Indo-Paki community for their reticence in coming out to support. They are subject to the stereotype. but they buy into the stereotype. As Muslims, we have to control the narrative, no matter what. We have to be in control of the narrative. We cannot allow people to define us and then stand back and allow it to perpetrate itself within the community. I'll give you an example. You remember you just talked about 9/11. I was part of 1993, the first World Trade Center bombing.
Yeah, I remember us having a conversation about that. Yes.
Yeah. And what we used to do, frankly, when we first got there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Muslims, lawyers out of that trial. So it was 5 defendants, something like that, 6 Muslim lawyers, 3, 4, we represent Mahmoud Halima, and 2 others represented Niyad Ayal. All right. Mm-hmm. Brilliant lawyer from Virginia, brother named Ahmed. What we used to do, that first they hit us with, because of the color of the skin, we were from the Nation of Islam. When they realized that we were intimately connected to the people who literally buried Malcolm X, so therefore we couldn't have been to the Nation of Islam, that we were from the so-called Sunni community, we were the nephews and nieces and cousins of Haji Sham Jabbar. Malcolm X again now is 1970. What is that? When did Malcolm assassinated? 65. So that takes us all the way back. We got a history now. They switched the narrative from us being members of the Nation of Islam. Again, remember, it's about controlling the narrative. Mm-hmm. We recognize what they're attempting to do. They're trying to have an impact in the minds of the people who will judge us, because jurors will judge your lawyer, who will judge us, and what the media will say about us. They're trying to shape the narrative of who we are. But it didn't stop us from every day at Dhuhr. We didn't find a masjid to pray in. We would go in the hallway in the United States District Court, Southern District, pull out Masala, and we would call the Adhan and pray right there in the hallway. We were determined that no matter what anybody said, we would be the Muslims that we were meant to be, because only by the grace of Allah were we in that courtroom anyway. So that at some point they had to relent and stop calling us Farrakhan followers, and stop calling us radical extremists, and stop calling us impolite because we were doing our job, because we had control of the narrative. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need. That's the one lesson that you have to take from cases like this. Your community support, as you indicate, it's not about the lawyer. There's an old adage in law. A lawyer is, 1 minute he's brilliant, the next minute he is a bum, depending on who you ask. So I used to always tell people, you want to know if I'm good at this? Come watch me work. Come to my office and sit down and watch me go through the library. But don't read my bio and think that you got a good lawyer. Come watch me work, sit down and talk to me, have lunch with me or something like that. 1 minute he's brilliant, the next minute he's a bum, depending on who you ask. You can spend all the money in the world, but you better be on top of that lawyer, in his face, in her face, making sure that she does the job right.
Mm-hmm. Let me say this, brother. It just came to me that CVE acronym, it stands for Countering Violent Extremism.
Extremists, yes.
That was the program that actually was initiated, if I'm not mistaken, during the Obama administration, for that purpose, supposedly, of countering violent extremist tendencies within Muslims, not in non-Muslims, within the Muslim community. And it became a device that enabled bigoted-minded operatives within the government, within certain government agencies, the ability to, at taxpayers' expense, target the Muslim community, right? In very horrific ways. And so, subhanAllah. Brother, this has been such a rich conversation, man. Another concern, another lesson that comes out of this for me, and we've been at times speaking on it directly, at other times speaking on it indirectly. I mean, it's been at the heart of our conversation for the past, it's been over 40 minutes now, or 50 minutes. The hour is almost up. The danger the danger of division within our community, within our faith community, the danger of division in times of crisis. I mean, we've got to get to a point, brother, where we learn lessons from the mistakes we've made, and we manage this. We cannot afford to continue to allowing the shaitan, the devil, the ability to divide, disrupt, and destroy within our community. You know, these 3 Ds: divide, disrupt, and destroy. You know, we've got to learn lessons from cases like this and our response to cases like this,
right.
You know, so that we are not repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And also on this issue of division, we have got to find a way. And I've really been having to reflect on this deeply over the past few days. I mean, we had a meeting that good friend of mine from the Pacifica Radio Network based in Georgia reached out to me on, wanted me to be a part of this Zoom meeting with executives and broadcasters, you know, key executives and broadcasters from different parts of, you know, Pacifica's national network within the U.S. For this meeting. They want to do a special broadcast on political prisoners. So they wanted me at the table, and you know, I was able to invite some other key Muslims from a couple of organizations also to be at the table. But you know, one of the things that came up during the course of our discussion, and I was a bit troubled by it, and you know, I pulled my brethren's coat to my, you know, brotherly displeasure with the conversation. With there was a you know, there was a desire on the part of a couple of the participants not to have this brother's case examined by Pacifica in a special broadcast, because in their opinion, he wasn't a political prisoner. And yes, subhanAllah, he is. But even if he wasn't, I mean, this case, even if he wasn't a political prisoner, the fact of the matter is this case has received and will continue to receive so much attention in the media.
Right.
You know, in national media, not just, you know, DMV media, national media.
Right.
There's all kind of articles and special reports that have been released already on this case out of Baltimore.
Right.
It provides us with an opportunity to shed light on so many others.
Yeah.
And to for us, for anyone to make the argument, well, you know, I'm not down with shedding, you know, giving this case too much of attention because either A, I don't consider him a political prisoner, or B, I don't like, you know, the sister and the ties this sister has, who has been one of his staunch supporters. SubhanAllah, that's cutting off the nose to spite the face.
Facts.
You know?
I agree. One of the problems, one of the things that you talk about learning lessons, right? If you took this case and you put it on a board and you put every political prisoner case that you know of next to it, what would you find? Police misconduct in those cases.
Yeah.
Police lying under oath.
Yeah.
Prosecutor overreaching.
Yes.
Fabricated evidence.
Yes.
Breaching of the constitutional rights of someone, whether it be a witness or a juvenile or whatever, right?
Yeah.
All of those things are consistent.
Yeah.
What else can you learn? You don't get these political prisoners free in 20 years except ongoing resistance.
That's right.
Same thing happened in this case. Ongoing resistance.
That's right.
an investigation that went behind the scenes of what the original investigation was. Because again, as defense attorneys, we get a file. Then we see if we can get our investigator to go look at things. But in the light of day, after all the evidence has been brought out, just like you indicated, there was a mistrial in the first one. In the second one, you get to clean it up.
Yeah.
All the mistakes. Well, as someone looking from behind the scenes, I get to see all the errors. That's what happened with the young lady, the young lawyer's investigation. Other people took her file and saw even more. But that's what it takes. That's what it would take to free Jamil Abdullah El-Amin.
That's right.
Because in his case, what did they say? They violated his constitutional rights. Listen to what the government said.
Yeah.
The court said, the 11th Circuit said, they violated his constitutional right by questioning whether or not he had the right to testify, by making it sound like by violating his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. The prosecutor literally argued, these are questions for Mr. El-Amin. Immediately, his case will be thrown out. What did this court rule? Yes, they did that. That was wrong, and it was error. It wasn't just harmless error. It was error that should have been reversed, except there was enough evidence to convict him. So they found an out with the enough evidence to convict him argument. Mm-hmm. But what happens if that investigation that you just turns over a witness who says, I spoke to Don. We used to work with him at LensCrafter. And the day after the girl was missing, he told me that the girl was missing because he heard the girl was missing. Mm-hmm. And I could see he had scratches and bandages on his hands. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that if you're the court?
Yeah.
Just like you have a confession in Jamil El-Amin from another guy who says, I did it. How do you deal with that? So you have to be able to be consistent and vigilant, regardless of whether you believe the person is a political prisoner. The process is that America is a political system. Criminal justice is a political construct. It's not a moral construct. It's not a right versus wrong, justice versus equality versus whatever song. It is a political construct. And it is designed for the one purpose, that is to control certain groups and to make sure that those groups never rise to the level of being able to challenge the status quo, the colonial settler group, the powers that be. And they allow the police officer to do whatever is necessary to maintain control. You just happen to be a victim of it this time. I may be a victim of it next time.
Okay, my brother, and that's going to have to be the last word. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for this conversation, brother, especially coming out of the hospital, man.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah. I knew you would bring it.
You see me sweating, right?
Yeah. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to no doubt continue this the nature of this conversation on another occasion, inshallah ta'ala. But we're going to stop this for now. And I want to thank everyone who was able to join us live for being able to join us. And I want to thank you even more for sharing the link, either the Facebook link or the YouTube link with others, inshallah ta'ala, or on Twitter. And, the struggle must continue.
I mean,
with that said, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati, wa tawassaw bil haqq, wa tawassaw bis sabr, which means, in the translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. The struggle must continue. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.